What's up, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. So today's special guest came to me a couple of weeks ago. I believe her assistant did. And, when I was reading her bio and everything and just kind of diving into who she is and, what she wanted to talk about, it kind of reminded me of two really good friends who have been on this podcast, both Victoria and Nicole. I've known them since about elementary school, and both of which have essentially transitioned out of the Jehovah's Witness. And I have had the outsider's perspective of witnessing the trauma and stuff that they face, whether that's family members that didn't talk to them for 20 years because they stepped out and didn't understand why. She is a trauma-informed coach, an author, and also an advocate. Please help me welcome Brooke. Brooke, how you doing?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me on the show and having this really important conversation.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time today to come on because like we talked about before we started recording, I think this conversation specifically, religious trauma is something that so many are either afraid to talk about or just can't talk about it for whatever reason. Um, and I think your story is very powerful. So I'm really grateful that you came on here.
Thank
Um,
you.
so let's talk about it a little bit. What was your personal journey of growing up as a Jehovah's Witness and what led you to leave?
So I will try to keep it as much as I can in condensed form. Obviously, it was a very long journey, but I was third generation Jehovah's Witness. So, it was ran very deep in my family, and my parents took it very seriously. So, being raised in that dynamic, there's not enough to be said about this fear-based paradigm that these religions, they use the apocalyptic belief system, right? That there's going to be this end of times, and if you don't comply, then you're going to be destroyed, like with all the other wicked people. Growing up that way as this little girl, like I was so afraid. Like I would actually have like these horrible nightmares as a little girl, waking up like sweating and thinking that I had died at Armageddon. And I would tell my parents like these horrible nightmares I was having, but they don't think that, wow, maybe this is actually affecting her on a really deep level. And it just shows that growing up in these type of environments, it is traumatic. They really put all of this fear into you, and you live that. You live and breathe that. It's in your nervous system. It is how you operate on a day-to-day basis. And I then had also a father that was an elder. So he was kind of the higher up and as a Jehovah's Witness, and was looked, to be revered, if you will, because he was supposed to be, because men were meant to be more important, women were meant to be submissive. So I also had that as a role model, as looking up to men, thinking that men were supposed to tell me what to do, how to act, what I could do and what I couldn't do. And my father was very much that in the family dynamic. He kind of governed my mother. He very much tried to control us as the children. And when I didn't conform, or when I kind of went against the rules, that's really when this other, I like to call it the Jekyll and Hyde, came out of my father. It was like this other version of him would come out, and he would be very angry and rageful. And he wanted to control. That was his ultimate thing. And so as I grew up, of course, typical teenager, right? She wants to have I want to have my own way of life, and I really am feeling like I don't want to conform to this really strict rules. And I started to kind of go against the system, and he did not like that. And so the more that I pushed and the more that I pushed, it was the more the resistance that I got back from him, and the more controlling my parents became. So it was really difficult. When I was about 15, 16, I ended up finding a boy, like every other girl does, committing what they believed was sin, so having sex before marriage, and got disfellowshipped from the congregation, which meant shunning. So, and you're probably familiar with this.
Mhm.
The shunning is basically no one gets to talk to you, so you get to show up at the church, but no one will look at you. You're just kind of, you're on the outside. You're punished right now. You're put in timeout, basically.
Right.
And here I am 16, I'm a young girl just trying to figure out her own way. And I felt so alone. I felt so sad. I felt very like a lot of shame, honestly, because they make you feel a lot of shame, right? And that happened for about a year. I stayed disfellowship for a year. So I couldn't talk to my friends that were in the society, and you can't talk to anybody that's on outside of the society, right? You can't associate with anybody. So my parents put me really, really tightly into this box. And man, I wanted to break out. I really wanted to break out, but that didn't happen then. I ended up marrying the boy 2 years later. I eloped, married him because I just wanted to be free.
Yeah.
That was my first ticket to freedom. And I didn't realize at the time that I was actually basically marrying into a carbon copy of my father.
Oh
I was
no.
eating a cycle. So I landed myself into a very abusive relationship for 17 years. Had no idea because I'd only been modeled this type of relationship,
Right.
right? No idea. And so I stayed in that relationship, had children with him, built a life. And then one day it was like, I just awakened to the fact that I had been in an abusive relationship for so long. I started to do the research and I started to see the personality traits and what narcissism was. And I know it sounds silly, but I just was so, you're so like put in a bubble as a Jehovah's Witness, if that
Mhm.
makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
They want to keep you like in this space where you don't look outside of the society, you don't read anything outside of the society. So you're honestly, your critical thinking skills are never developed. Your ability to actually think for yourself is never developed. Like there's just so many things that are kind of taken away from you because that's ultimately their goal is to control and manipulate you.
Yeah.
So I realized that I was in this relationship and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get out of here. I need to get out of here. This is not okay. And it was the day that he put a knife to my throat that I knew that I needed to leave. That's not like I just realized like, okay, I can't continue to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
And about the same time, we had been going through this very tumultuous time because my then partner had come to me and said, I know that this religion is a cult. This religion is covering up child sex abuse cases. And he started to show me all of like the governing body, who is like the leaders of the pack, if you will, were being put on a stand in Australia for the Royal Commission because they were covering up all of these child sex abuse cases since 1950, never reporting these predators. And so that meant that these predators were inside the churches. Nobody knew, having free reign, thinking that we're supposed to trust everyone inside of this
Right.
congregation. And when he told me this, and I started to watch it for myself, and I was like, well, wait a minute, I'm a mother of two boys. What kind of mother would I be if I'm letting my kids go to this place? I don't even know if there's a predator sitting here next to me.
Right.
And that really started to make me very sick. But I did react just like a Jehovah's Witness is trained to do. We're like little armies. People were trained to be like, you're wrong. You've been possessed by the devil. Like something's wrong with you. You can't keep reading that stuff. How dare you read that stuff? Jehovah God will take care of it. I did the exact thing I had been taught to do. I defended the religion. And then it was like something just the more that he planted seeds of doubt of the doctrine and everything else, I started to just kind of say, okay, there's something here. And I started to say, I need to leave this altogether. So I left the cult and my relationship in one fell swoop that year in 2017. And I never looked back. That was it.
That's so I want to start with the narcissist part because I feel like, and maybe you might feel the same way because nowadays we hear that word so much, and people like you and I know exactly what a narcissist looks like. And you said 17 years in that marriage, right? And they were a carbon copy of your father. So I can only imagine how hard just breaking that cycle was and realizing that you needed to step away. Um, so my question is, how did it affect your relationship with your children at all? Like, just I guess leaving that marriage and I guess them being used to what you were used to essentially.
Yeah. My youngest wasn't affected. He was pretty young. He was about 4 years old when we left. Obviously, the divorce affected him. My oldest, I felt like really got hit the hardest. He was about 11, 12. And so he had already grown up enough, gotten indoctrinated, really. really believed it. Like when we left, he like was angry at both me and his dad because he's like, "Oh my gosh, how dare you leave this religion and you're going to be destroyed." And like he was doing what he'd been taught to say as well. And so that for a period of time, broke my heart because he also was very confused. And here he was, this young little boy that had really his whole world was falling apart as well. So it did never really affect our relationship. I never really have told the whole entire aspect of everything about my relationship in the past, if you will, because I really like to keep that safeguarded for them because we lost their father in 2020. So, to an overdose. So,
Oh,
because when we left the religion, um, it's very painful. I mean, it sounds like you've had people that have had to do this. You
yeah,
probably have experienced how painful it can be, the loss that you encounter of family, community, identity. Like there is just so much that
yeah,
you take a big hit
right.
and us don't recover. The suicide rate for people that leave these type of high control religions and cult-like systems is really, really high. The mental health in itself is just, he couldn't recover.
Um, I just, I know your past with him and everything is really rough, but the sense of it's still the same. I'm so sorry for your loss. Um, I know walking away from that couldn't have been easy, especially it being your children's father. Um, and an overdose, I think, is one of the conversations that so many acknowledge is happening, but they don't want to talk about it. I feel suicide as a whole, and I didn't know that the suicide rate was high within that community of people that tried to leave it. Um, I'm really big on the conversation of suicide, and I feel that while it's great that we talk about the awareness and the conversation of, let's have a community and stand together, people aren't ready to have that conversation of all the sticky stuff in between of the suicide conversation. Um, so you transition and you leave that relationship out. And so what do you feel was the biggest challenge for you once you were completely separated from both your relationship and that religion? What do you feel was the biggest challenge after you separated?
Well, I think partly it was I didn't realize how trauma bonded I was to the relationship. I felt like I was coming off of a drug. And if anybody has ever been in a relationship where you have been in like this toxicity and this like codependency and like this, it really is creating a chemical addiction in your body from the highs and the lows. And that's the easiest way I can explain it. You can look up a trauma bond and it will literally say that. It's just this physical attachment that you have to your abuser that you don't even realize is playing out in real time. And so when you actually like peel yourself off of this thing, you are feeling like you are I don't know how to say it other than like feel like you're kind of dying inside a little bit
Yeah,
because you're like, where's my drug? Where's that thing that makes me feel better?
right.
And it's really interesting how that works. And I've met many other people that have had that same type of parasitic relationship that has had that same thing happen to them.
Right.
And so I like to speak about that. That was very, very difficult for me. Like I was very high anxiety. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, was really, really struggling. So I kind of went through this detox period, if you will. And then after that, it got a lot easier because I had to also detox from this religious belief system.
Yeah,
Kind of like chucked it to the side because I like was just trying to survive and like be a mom and like get my world put together. So I threw the belief system to the side and I said, I'm just not going to look at this because that was really hard for me to even look at because I was so angry. I was so angry at like God and being betrayed and like, okay, well, why did I live my whole life for this religion and waste it? I felt like
right.
that's what I felt
Wow.
like. Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought up trauma bonding because I feel like that's something that I guess people are aware that they're doing and just don't really acknowledge the fact that they're with somebody for that reason. Um, I feel, I grew up in a pretty a separated family, if you will, and I had a really bad relationship with my mom.
Mm.
Really narcissistic human being. She was abusive. So any female that moving forward, when I started getting older and I started dating, I saw the good traits, if you will, in said females that ended up being narcissists themselves. And it's like almost repeating that pattern because it's so familiar to you. And it brings me to the conversation that I feel I hear so many people say, "Oh, you're in an abusive relationship, so why don't you just leave?" And there's that stigma of being in that relationship with somebody. It's not as easy as just walking away. And
Not, it's not.
glad that you brought up trauma bonding because that is something that so many people in this world struggle with that don't realize that they're in it.
Yes. And I think that that's perfectly said to that because you know what? I used to hear that all the time. Well, why didn't you just leave? Why would you stay? And it's sad, but that's why they have this thing where they call it Stockholm syndrome, right? Like it's like it is actually, I can say it from experience, it's actually impossible to leave. Like you literally feel there's a lot of fear. The abuser often creates a lot of fear tactic in you as well. If you leave, this is going to happen, or you're not going to be able to survive without me, or I'm going to take all your money, or like whatever it is, right? There's also the fear component, and then jumping into the unknown. And then you also are addicted to the abuser because you're addicted to that intermittent affection, right? And it sounds like you had that relationship with your mom where it was probably you saw this beautiful side of her that was probably loving at times. And then you also saw the Jekyll and Hyde come out where it was like
Yeah,
the crazy and the abusive and the harmful side, right? And so our brains like literally go into cognitive dissonance and we're like, I don't know how to accept this version of her because this version doesn't make sense, but I really like this version of her. And then it's like, okay, well, the brain says we'll throw away the bad version and we'll just look at the good.
right.
And that's why people stay so stuck. And actually, they say it takes up to 7 times for someone to leave an abuser. Like they leave and they come back, they leave and they come back because of this component, this trauma bond. So, and it doesn't just happen in romantic relationships, just like you
Right.
said, it happens in family, it happens in friendships, it can happen in a workplace. There's
Absolutely.
so, yeah, it's just toxicity.
It took me about 2 years of therapy to realize what the term love bombing was. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't understand how heavy it was within a narcissistic personality. Every time her and I would get into an argument and not talk for months, then all of a sudden, I love you, I miss you, and send all these pictures of her and I when I was younger. And, I just had a therapy session this past Thursday, and I was telling her, I said, I have learned to turn myself off to when she's doing that. Just like, oh, I love you, and don't acknowledge it. Oh, I'm going to send you all these pictures of you and I don't acknowledge it. And I've noticed she stopped doing it as much because you're blocking off, you're, I guess, putting up that boundary for yourself. And I feel when people like you and I are separated from those people, boundaries is the hardest thing that I think we had to learn, especially when it came to future relationships with people, future friendships. And, you said you protected most of your story from your kids. Another boundary for your, not only them, but for yourself as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, you have to learn those things because often when you're raised in an abusive household, you weren't taught boundaries. You don't even know what boundaries are because your parents didn't have boundaries and they didn't teach you boundaries. And now you're like, what are boundaries? I mean, I still work with clients that are like, well, what are boundaries? Like, what does that mean when you say that word?
Right.
And you have to get really down into the most simplistic form of, well, it's where do you draw a line with how you will accept being treated?
Yeah.
How will you say, you know what, this is enough, I can't handle anymore? And how will you put that hand up to protect yourself, because now you get to, now you're old enough, you're not that kid anymore. You get to protect yourself. And it's just really important to be able to learn that within your whole entire dynamic because you're protecting your own energy.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up your clients that because that kind of brings me to my next question. How did your experiences shape your approach to being, your trauma informed coaching?
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't doing this before. I was in the beauty industry in the past. And when my ex-husband then died in 2020, things just kind of shattered my reality. It kind of awakened me to the fact that, okay, I don't really want to continue to go this route. I wanted to help people because I was suffering. I had really severe complex PTSD still at the time. I was still getting very triggered. I was still seeing how my past was kind of really playing out in my present life, and I still needed to do so much deeper healing. And so, as I went on that journey, it led me to becoming the trauma coach, to RTT therapy to help people access their subconscious mind where your traumas all sit and your belief system and the thoughts that you carry about yourself, and to help show them that they can change those, that it is all possible, that you don't have to live this very limited life or see yourself as this limited individual, that there's just so much more possibility out there. So it really helped me embrace this is my journey. This is my purpose. This is the people I want to help. I want to help women that have been battered. I also help men as well. I want to help people that have survived high control religions and cults because this is deeply traumatic. I'm still unraveling and like finding things that from the religious programming and the trauma that I endured that is still needing to be healed.
Right. With the different dynamic of guests I've had on here, I've had people that, didn't suffer trauma like you and I. And then I've also had people that hit like the absolute rock bottom. I've always found it fascinating that in our worst times of our lives, whether it's experiencing a death, whether it's trauma, abuse, whatever it is, it always hits a switch in our brain. Like, I want to use this to not only get better, but I want to help other people. I want people to hear my story. And I remember when I moved back down here to Florida, I lived in New Jersey for about a year with my mom because, again, separating that relationship is really hard. Um, I gave her the chance of, just trying to uh, form that bond again, have rebuild that relationship. And unfortunately, it led to my second attempt when I was 27. So when I moved back down here, I remember I started with a therapist who was just god awful. I was only with her for 2 sessions because she didn't take down any notes. And the first thing she said, she's like, "Oh, would you take a prescription?" I'm like, "I don't want pills. Like, I just want somebody to hear me out." And I almost gave up. Um, Before I started the therapist that I have now, I remember going on to a suicide prevention rocks page and sharing my story. It got about like 600 likes in like 2 hours. And I'm like, oh, this is something. Okay, I wasn't expecting anybody to really pay attention because, that stigma of men sharing their stories and, being vulnerable is pretty prominent in this community. And we're getting better, of course. But um, I feel it's really hard for men just to share their story simply for the fact of we're supposed to be macho, be a man, rub dirt in it. But I always found it fascinating when we're in our worst moments that we want to start helping other people by sharing our stories.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. And thank you for being vulnerable enough for you to share your story. I think that's amazing because I truly believe that everybody has a story inside of them. Everybody has a story inside of them, and it's just about being able to say, am I bold and courageous enough to say it? Because someone is going to need to hear what you have to say.
Right.
And maybe it's hundreds or millions of people. You don't know what it is. You don't know what the trickle effect is going to be. It's just that someone needed to hear your story and you were brave enough to say it. And so I always like anybody I meet, I'm like, oh my gosh, let your story be told. Like, it's so freeing. It's so liberating to just kind of like put it out there and say what you need to say. And you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks or doesn't think. It's just that, you left it there and whoever needs to hear it's going to hear it.
Right. And I think it's so important to mention that one person that needs to hear it and the impact you have on that person. Um, I've had somebody message me saying that I saved their life. I'm like, I don't know about saving your life. And then they just kind of like reinforce that point. And then I'm like, listen, like I was struggling for a really long time with almost the same thing you were, and I thought I was alone. And you saved my life. And it's gratifying. It really is. Because it's like, wow, you're doing something right. And I'm sure you have felt this because I know I have, but having that imposter syndrome of like, am I doing enough? And if is what I'm doing the right path for me? Like, obviously, you have all these hundreds of people, say to you on a monthly basis that you're making a difference and you don't feel like you're making a difference, but that one person makes such a big difference than hearing 100 people tell you you're doing a good job.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, just like your shirt says, you are enough. I think that there's a part of us, especially if we haven't had like the validation from a parent or a caregiver, or, we just didn't have that space. Sometimes we think that we're supposed to keep going and keep doing more and more and more. But at the same time, we're already enough like the way that we are, just in this moment. The moment that you shared your story, that was enough. Like, you don't have to keep going at the rate that it's too much for your capacity, but just knowing that, you know what, everything is a ripple effect that you do. Everything, just like you doing this podcast, it's a ripple effect, right? Someone will listen to this podcast that needed to hear what I had to say or what you had to say, and it will create that ripple effect. And we may not even see it sometimes. Like we may not even know, and it's just about using our voice, putting it out there, and then just knowing that we did our job. We shared what we needed to share.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And when I first started doing this podcast, I'd probably say the first year I really struggled with myself. Just, oh, this podcast wasn't very good. It only had 2 listeners. This one only had 6. And this past, again, my last therapy session, I told her that I'm like, hey, Jess, like, I stopped looking at the numbers. And her jaw dropped. She's like, you did? I've been telling you to stop doing that because you're doing great work. And I said, you know, I had to drill that in my head that if it's one person or it's 100 people doesn't mean that it wasn't a powerful conversation. It just means that one person needed to hear that podcast. And I had to, I struggled so long, Brooke. I couldn't even tell you of not feeling like I was enough, not feeling like I was doing good things because I wasn't getting acknowledgement. I wasn't getting validation. Not that I need it, it's just you want that gratifying feeling sometimes. And I stopped looking at the numbers, and I'm really proud to say that.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations. That is huge. Yeah, because you just know this, I do this because I love it. I
Yeah,
do this because I feel purpose. I do this because I enjoy it.
right.
Um, and I feel that very much so about my own work that I do too. It's more of like, I do this because I know it feeds my soul.
Yeah.
It feeds my soul, makes me feel like, I'm touching the world in some way and helping lift other people up. And I
Mhm.
think that's the most beautiful thing.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier, some of the programming that you were finding yourself struggling with, of just like how to disconnect from it, how to retrain your brain, essentially. Um, Can you explain what subconscious programming is and how it affects individuals who experience high control environments?
Yeah, of course. So everything that I have been taught and learned in my schooling and on my deep studies is that, I don't know if anybody's heard of Bruce Lipton. If you haven't looked him up, look him up. He's amazing. But he, along with other neuroscientists, explain that our subconscious is programmed really from birth to 7 years old. We're taking in everything that we're modeled. We're being conditioned by our parents, our caregivers, our immediate surroundings. We're literally like a sponge, right? And our brain is operating today from this original blueprint. And so that's why we choose and attract the same type of partner because what we were modeled, right? That's part of our programming. It says, oh, well, this is familiar. I'm going to go, this seems like what I should be with. And reprogramming or rewriting or rewiring your brain is actually teaching it that no, this is not what I want to be familiar anymore. I don't want an abusive partner anymore. So now I'm going to implement and rewire my brain to know what is safe, what I want it to be familiar with. And that's how you kind of reprogram the mind, if you will. So that's what I like to say. It's like really you create your identity when you're younger, and then your experiences happen, and then your traumas happen, right? And then you continue to create that programming from those experiences. And then you have those beliefs about yourself,
Right.
which I think everybody on some level has the belief of I'm not enough. It was happened somewhere in their life, right? But you weren't born, I'm thinking I'm not enough, like that's that little baby, right? But somewhere in your childhood, something happened, and it doesn't even have to be that deeply traumatic. It could just be like your mom was too busy to pay attention to you, or like you didn't matter in a situation. And all of a sudden, you have this deep belief that you're not enough or you don't matter. And so you make decisions, habits, and perform from that belief. And you bring in those people that make you feel and validate that belief of I'm not enough or I don't matter.
You
I hope
know,
that makes
yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I think I posted something on social media a couple weeks ago where it's like people don't realize how long something that they say to somebody else echoes in somebody's head.
sense.
And whether that's a good thing that they say to you or it's a bad thing. And I feel that affirmations are so important, telling yourself in the mirror every day that you're enough or that it's going to be a good day. If you tell yourself something enough times, you start to believe it. And that goes on both sides of the fence, whether it's positive or negative. Um, I think the biggest thing that I struggled with my mom was even if it was a good, productive conversation, back of my head, I'm hearing her voice say those nasty things that she said to me.
Mhm.
And I've told my therapist I struggle with this too because, of course, you want that healthy relationship with your
Yeah.
parents. And I've forgiven her for myself, not for her or for her own gratification, but it's really hard to let go of some of the most hurtful things that is said or done to you,
Yes.
and of course they say, letting things go will help you heal, but people don't realize that words are just like knives too. Those scars are still going to be there regardless of how much healing you do,
Yeah.
and I feel it's important to always have that support group, in your corner to give you those affirmations to remind you that you're enough or even be your own support system because so many of us struggle with that self-love, especially after these turbulent relationships.
Yes. It's so true. I want to bring up something too, because I think a lot of people don't realize this, and it's kind of sometimes like it's a little bit of a showstopper because it makes people think. We're often subconsciously stuck at the age that we received the least amount of love.
Yeah.
So if you really feel into that and you're like, ah, where am I subconsciously stuck where I receive the least amount of love? And we feel into that because those wounds that your mom ripped open, made you kind of bleed all over the place. Like you're creating and remembering those things. And that often that inner critic, that little voice, that negative voice in your head is often not even your own voice. It's the voice of the caregiver that put you down or hurt you or wounded you. And that's how you view yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's that when you talk about self-love, oh my gosh, go back and connect with that little Chris or that little you, whoever's listening, and find out what that little you didn't get. And now you get to give it to him.
Yep. Yep.
You get to give it to him and you get to nurture him and you get to give him the love that he never received. And that has been one of the biggest gifts in my healing journey is connecting with that little inner child in me and being able to love her, give her the things that she didn't have. And that is where you create this connection to self-love. Because
Yeah.
we often as an adult will berate ourselves and we'll look in the mirror and we'll say, oh my gosh, I'm getting old or I've got this going on. Or, we'll say whatever it is that we say that's negative to ourselves. But if you had your little self sitting right smack in front of you, you were looking at your little self, how would you talk to that little you? That I think is the biggest piece that you can start to look at. How would you talk to that little you? You would not say what you say today to yourself. You
Right.
wouldn't.
And one of the most powerful things I ever heard was being that person for other people you wish you had when you were younger.
Yes.
And I did a mental health panel last year, and I remember I found a picture of a younger version of myself. I think I was 8 years old, maybe seven, somewhere around that age. And then I posted the picture of my first attempt, not the event, but the age I meant. At 14, it was like my little um, school ID that I had, and you could just see it in my face. I was angry, I was lost, I just didn't know who I was. And I remember putting on that post, I'm like, we did it. Like people are listening, people are hearing you out. And I said, I don't think anything can hurt my inner child anymore. Like I have put so much love and effort into making sure that he's protected that now I can live my life the way I want to and heal at the pace that he deserves to have. And I'm really glad you brought up inner child work. I feel that's like one of the most important parts of healing because a lot of people don't want to go back into their past and relive those moments. But in order to heal, in my opinion, I feel it's important to address that, whether you were abused, whether you had a narcissist relationship, whatever it is, it's important to acknowledge that stuff happens because we compartmentalize every event that we go through. And sometimes we relive it, and sometimes we just go back and acknowledge, yeah, wow, that sucked, but we're here now. And I feel that's the most important part that people need to always hear. You're here now, and you made it through the worst times of your life. Now it's time to heal and do better.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfectly said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
What do you feel are the most common misconceptions about trauma and recovery that you have encountered in your work?
Um, you know, I think a lot of people say if I heal, I can just be done with it. Like I can just get there fast. And a lot of, that was a lot of my story where it was like, okay, well, I'm suffering. What's the fastest way to get here? Like I thought there was an end game, you know? And a lot of people do. They think that, you're going to be able to do a couple of years of therapy and then you're going to be done, right? You've done it. And I want to tell people that that's just not true. You are on a journey and you're always constantly becoming a better version of yourself. You're constantly growing, learning, uncovering new layers and continuing the journey. So there's no end game until this life is over. And it's up to you to recognize that, there's always something to uncover. So I think that's what always like to talk about but at some point, there is a point where you get to a space where you're like, you know what? I can look at my trauma from a totally different perspective. I can see it from a different perspective. I can start to even see, my family members from a different perspective and just say, you know what? These were just wounded individuals that don't even know what they're doing. They're just unconsciously playing out their own trauma. And that I think is also really a huge a huge jump of where you can kind of get to because you can kind of put that person in that box. And I think that's where you kind of come into the forgiveness and you start to say, you know what? I don't have to have that relationship with that person. I don't have to like that person. I don't even have to love that person. I just have to see them for what it is. And I have to
Yeah.
just accept it, right? It's just the acceptance. That's it.
I was
Otherwise, we'll
just going
grieve
to say that. Yeah.
forever. Yeah, we'll grieve forever,
Yeah.
right? We'll still expect something from them. We'll still think at some point they'll show up or they're going to act different or they're going to change or they're going to be the one that we needed all this time. But when you come into your acceptance, that is an in game. Like you finally are like, oh, I see it for what it is. And I don't need anything. I have zero expectations. And there's the freedom. And you can see how far you've come in your healing journey.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad you said the word acceptance because I feel once you accept things for what they were and what they are, it is the literal most freeing thing in the world you can do on your healing journey. For me, it was accepting that my parents are never going to change. My mom refuses to break out of that cycle that she was taught as a kid. And my dad will never break out of the being emotionally unavailable for people's cycle. So it's just one of those things where when I started accepting that my dad wasn't going to change, because for me, every boy wants that strong relationship and validation with their father and want to hear the words, "I'm proud of you." When I started therapy, when I started this podcast, I just wanted to hear that one time. Haven't heard it from him my entire life. He's never said he was proud of me, not once. And I was chasing that ghost for so long.
Yeah.
And when I finally got to the point of he's not going to ask you how you're doing, he's not going to ask about your podcast, he's not going to ask you about therapy. I said to my therapist, I said, Jess, I have accepted the fact that I will never hear those words from my father. And I'm done chasing that ghost of validation because that ghost was a demon. It
Yes.
was it was something that was just sitting on my shoulder, like, oh, you're never gonna hear that from your dad. He doesn't give a shit about you. And I don't think that part is true about him not giving a shit. I just think he doesn't know how to express himself in any kind of way towards his family or kids. And then with my mom accepting that she's never going to get better because she doesn't want to get better. She's in that professional victim mentality. And
Yep.
it's unfortunate. But again, guys, like Brooke just said, once you get to that acceptance level, it is the most freeing thing you will ever experience in your entire life because you will finally be free of those shackles and those chains that were put on your soul. So thank you, Brooke, for saying acceptance because I feel it's something a lot of people need to hear.
Completely. I completely agree. And I think that thank you for talking about the chasing your dad's validation. I mean, I did that for years. I didn't learn that lesson until I was about 36 years old. I finally realized, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for so long and I ain't ever gonna get it. And I've got to stop doing this. And when you've kind of had that like aha moment where the light bulb kind of comes on, you're like, why am I still doing this? Like, this
Yeah,
is crazy. Like, this is just silly behavior, Then you're realizing, okay, I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and I'm expecting a different result, and I'm never seeing that. And that's the definition of insanity,
yeah,
right? So when you figure that out, whatever you're doing in your life that you're continuing to repeat on a patterned basis, and you break that pattern and realize it never served you, nothing was ever going to change. That's another space of where you get to just come into your own and be like, you know what? I don't need that anymore. It's okay. I can give that to myself.
absolutely agreed.
Mhm.
So you had written a memoir titled Shattered, Broken, and Beautiful. And, judging by the story we've heard so far, I think it's a very fitting title because I feel that one, you started at a very low point of breaking out and that trauma that you faced that basically shattered you in creating the beautiful human being that you are now. And I think that's really powerful. Um, what motivated you to write this book, and what do you hope readers take away from it?
So there was just, I don't know how to explain it, but there was just this calling inside of me that said I needed to put pen to paper and I need to write my story. And I didn't look back. I began writing and it was like I couldn't stop. It just started flowing out of me. And as it flowed out of me, it was like I was also healing at the same time. It was very cathartic. Um, and the whole entire purpose of writing this book became a way to, I don't like to say it in this way, but it's the truth. It's a way to awaken the authenticity that's you in your own soul and what you came here to be. I know each woman that has read it, each man that's read it has said to me, you know what, this kind of triggered some things in me. This kind of brought some things to the surface. And that was exactly the purpose for it. It was meant to be read to trigger you and see what needed to still heal within you, because I knew it was going to be read for the people that were on their healing journey, whether it was from abuse or from high control religion or from the fact that they'd never been able to be their real selves because they didn't know who their real selves were. It was for those people that had felt lost and broken. And that was the whole purpose of writing the book. And now that it's released, I have received that in tenfold back to me by everybody that's read it that has said, oh my gosh, I needed to read this. I couldn't put this book down. I had to read this and it's triggered so much stuff in me. And now I know what I need to heal. And it's kind of revived them to see, ah, I can have this freedom and I want what you have. So I'm going to go for it. And that's what I wanted to do. I want to motivate people to be the best version of themselves and to keep going, not to give up, right? Like you've got this.
I love that. I always attributed, writing uh, identical to putting demons on paper. Putting your demons in a word format. And I feel for me, drawing was always something that did that for me. It was always like, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and today I feel like I've poured all my cup, everything in my cup to people that wouldn't do it for me. And
Yeah.
I remember showing it to my therapist, and she's like, that's really profound. Like, have me pouring the cup, and you just see like a bone dry cup pouring into, I want the hands of the needy. So, I feel that writing is so important, just for the simple fact that you can, like you said, be authentic to yourself, and hearing that validation from other people saying that they helped, that you helped them. Uh, I can only imagine how much better you felt that you were open to sharing your story. Um, I have had people ask me when I'm gonna write a book. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. um, just for the fact that I don't want to revisit some things. I don't want to put them on paper and read it again because some of it's really hard to relive. Um, but I congratulate you for writing that memoir and doing what you've done with it because I feel that your story specifically is, again, like we said at the beginning of this podcast, a conversation that so many need to hear. Um, and with triggers too, I feel that's another conversation that a lot of people maybe aren't too familiar with because nowadays it's 2025, you hear the word triggered and it's a meme, it's a ha ha. But
True.
before my brother was killed by a drunk driver, um one of our last conversations was about triggers. He's like, I know um people use the word triggered all the time and make fun of people that are triggered. He's like, so I just wanted to call you and ask you, what are triggers? And it was one of the best conversations I've ever had with somebody because people don't understand how much a trigger affects people. And like you said, when they realize what they need to address in their life
Mhm.
from that trigger is just such a feeling I couldn't possibly put in words. Because when I get triggered by stuff, I shut down. I'm like, okay, what is
Mhm.
going on and why am I feeling this way? Most
Yes.
people don't have that reaction.
They don't. No, that shows how much growth you've had, right? Because, and I like to say what trigger is. It's when you feel uncomfortable.
Hmm.
When you are feeling discomfort, you are triggered. When you are feeling uncomfortable in your body and you're feeling a little activated and you're feeling a little bit like, okay, do I want to punch somebody or do I want to shut down? Like, this means that something lit that tripwire in you, and all of a sudden your mind is going back into the past to a past event. It's traveling back in time, and it is saying, this is happening in real time. You've got to defend yourself, you've got to freeze, you've got to fawn, or you've got to like run, right? And so it's why you're feeling that uncomfortability in your body. And so what it is it's a gift to see what you still need to heal, why this bothered you, what's the story, to sit with it, to let yourself feel emotion if there's emotion. And guess what? Then that trigger is not as big anymore. It doesn't
Yeah.
become this thing where because otherwise we avoid it, right? We go numb or we go drink or we go drug or we go like whatever we're doing to avoid the uncomfortability. It's still there. It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
inside of you. And you just need to face it. You got to face it.
Completely agree. Um,
Yeah.
what advice would you give someone who is currently struggling with leaving a high control religion or recovering from narcissistic abuse?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, the first thing that I did not do is I would go get support. Go get someone that's done it, that's out there supporting you, whether it's me or someone else, I don't care. It's about going and getting support and community that's going to help lift you up because doing it on your own, I promise you, is not going to be effective. But that is actually what most people do because it's a trauma response.
Yeah.
I can do this. I can do it. I can take care of myself, right? Because we did that as children where we were all alone. We didn't have the caregiver to support us. And so we think that we can do it on our own. Guess what? You are just literally crippling yourself. You cannot do it on your own. It's going to take longer. It's going to be more suffering. It's going to be so difficult to get through those spaces. But if you have that person that can show you and kind of be that flashlight for you and kind of light the way and be like, oh, this is what's happening. And now I can explain why. You have like a breath of fresh air and you can finally feel like, okay, well, I'm not alone. I'm okay. Like now I have this support system. Everything's going to be okay. I'm going to be able to figure it out. It's just having someone to kind of hold your hand through the process is so powerful.
Completely agree. It's almost essentially like you're looking for somebody to be your lighthouse, guide you through the shark infested waters and get out of that water.
Mhm.
Um, or even being somebody's lifeboat. You can use whatever analogy you want, and it's still going to be the same. Finding that person um, to support you is so important, and sometimes it might be outside of your friend circle. I remember for the longest time that people were so against therapy when I first told them I was going. Oh, why are you going to therapy? Just talk to me. I'm like, it's not the same when you're talking to friends about what you're struggling with because either they tell you what you want to hear. Oh yeah, you're not wrong in that situation or whatever it is. I don't like talking to friends about stuff like that because my therapist offers the completely out of my circle advice and perspective while my friends are going based off a 10-year friendship. And I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, no, that's fine. I did it the right way. Um, I just recently had an instance where I was robbed by a friend who I've been friends with for over 10 years, and she had asked me if she could live with me, while she gets her stuff together. And I didn't respond to her for a day. I just acknowledged like, hey, like you still didn't pay me back, and I'm still really angry about it. And I responded to her the next day. And when I read my response to my therapist, she's just like, I can't believe you responded like that. Like that was the most under control civil response I think I've ever heard somebody say. I'm like, my initial response was anger.
Yeah, of course.
And when you take a step back on responding to people on whatever it is, you have so much more clarity on what you
Mhm.
want to say to them. And you don't have to be hurtful to people. Hurt people hurt people. I'm no longer a hurt person, so I'm not going to hurt you, you know? And I feel it's super important to find people outside of your circle, your immediate circle, to get that support, to get that guidance that you may or may not need.
Yeah, completely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And you're getting a third party perspective,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so you're getting better feedback regardless. So it's just such a better space to be in for yourself and empowers you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How can listeners support your mission and get involved in your advocacy efforts?
So my website is lifecoachinggoddess.com. They always can find me anywhere on social media as well. So if they're, know of anybody, sending them my way. Also, in helping me get the word out there, that there is more. And don't worry, like there's so many people to support you. And I have a lot of, just free videos and lots of insight and things that I just give. That's lots of value to my audience, to be honest. That's just there so people can learn.
I love it. What social medias are you on so we can have our listeners follow you?
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, yeah,
Awesome.
whatever.
So this question I like to ask all my guests, and that is, what is one thing you would change in the mental health community?
Hmm. Not putting band-aids over problems.
Mm, I
Um,
love that.
yeah, not putting band-aids over real problems. I am a big advocate for the psychedelic movement. I don't know if we know a lot about psychedelics or that's too much for this podcast, but I really believe it was a profoundly changed my life and helped me heal a lot of my PTSD as well. And so I don't think that we need things to put band-aids on. I think we already have everything accessible for us to be able to heal. It's just about being able to have access to those things. And I believe that everybody should be able to have access to those things. So.
Completely agreed.
Mhm.
So as mentioned before we start recording, I like to read a quote based on the mental health or whatever subject that we are talking about. If you have that quote ready, feel free to share yours first.
Okay, mine's by Maya Angelou, and it's if you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, change your attitude. And I think that is like, there's so much power in that because a lot of the times when we had horrible things happen to us, we feel like a victim.
Yeah,
But if you can change your attitude about it, you can take what happened to you and you can turn it into your purpose. You can do what you're doing. You can create something from this, these lemons, you can turn them into lemonade. So it's all in the shape of how you view things in your perspective.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mhm.
So today's quote comes from Enlightened Consciousness, and it reads, "It's up to us to break generational curses. When they say it runs in the family, you tell them, and this is where it runs out."
Love that. That's a good one. I've read that one before. I love it.
I think, what when it comes to your story, whether it comes to my story, I feel like we had generations of trauma that just built up and built up, and it stopped at you and I. It stopped at our conversation, telling our story. So I'm forever proud that I decided to make that post, and I'm so happy that you decided to break away from what you were going through and be able to share your story. So, thank you so much for coming on today's podcast again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Chris.
And for all our listeners, thank you guys so much for supporting. As always, much love and be gentle with yourselves. Till next time, guys, take care.